Hello, thank you for watching. Today I'm going to explain how the structural adjustment programs imposed by the Western world on African governments have made African governments collapse and weak. My name is Odonga. I'm a lawyer, I am a thinker, I am a critical thinker, I'm a researcher, I am an author, I'm a contemporary philosopher. That every Monday of the week I load a video on issues of importance to the African continent, and every Friday I load videos of issues of importance to specific countries. Let's go a little bit to the history. What is structural adjustment program? Let me, as a political scientist, go to the history. Before 1991, the whole world was more of communism or socialism. It ran a communism and quasi-socialist mode. And at that time, Russia was the superpower. The model of the world in Russia, in Romania, in most of Europe, were a socialist model where things are done for the collective good of people. But there was a battle, a clash of ideologies. Communism and socialism ruled the world, but there was a clash of ideology that majorly emerged from the United States of America, that communism and socialism does not work. The model which works is capitalism, where individuals own capital. The thinkers in the US were saying government is not good at doing business. So there was a clash of civilization, a clash of ideologies, led by United States of America on one side and led by Russia on the other side. And that is what in history we call the Cold War. So in 1991, the American side won the Cold War. Communism and socialism collapsed, and then capitalism came on board. So in 1991, the Iron Curtain fell in Berlin. That was dividing Eastern and Western Germany. Part of Germany was under capitalism, parts of Germany was under socialism. There was a curtain, an iron curtain, a wall between. When the walls collapsed, that is what we say it was the end of the Cold War. Now in Africa, the Western world, America, who is the biggest shareholder in the International Monetary Fund, came to Africa and said, we have to make changes in the way you run your government. What did our traditional leaders that got independence do? Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, Julius Nyerere in Tanzania, Milton Obote in Uganda, Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya. We had the 1960 club in East Africa, we call them Mungoshi Club. These were socialist presidents with socialist ideologies. And they created government companies that would do business for government. In Zambia, we had Zambeef. In Uganda, Uganda Meat Packers. Railway corporations were formed. Zambia Copper. Uganda Railways, Mulco and Pamba, Weights and Measures, Foods and Beverages, National Housing, National Hotels. Our founding fathers created institutions that would do business for government, ministries of works, housing, transport, and communication. So in 1960s, 70s, 80s, we saw government investing in infrastructure and they were delivering services. You need roads, the government would do it. Today, you get a contractor because of the IMF. We created banks, national banks, commercial banks. Everything was Africanized. And when the IMF, when communism, when the Cold War ended, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, brought what we call the structural adjustment programs. These were terms and conditions that were dictated to African governments that adjust the following if we are to give you aid. They started closing government parastatals. Close to 80% of government parastatals were closed in the African continent. The IMF and the structural adjustment programs, in my opinion, was the biggest lie told to the African governments. And I'm going to show you Africa before IMF and Africa after IMF. They said governments that did structural adjustments would get loans from the International Monetary Fund. Let's check the statistics. Zimbabwe in 1980 had a growth rate of 4% per annum. The infant mortality rate in Zimbabwe in 1980 fell from 100 children for 1,000 births to 50 children per 1,000 births. That is in Zimbabwe. IMF gave a loan to Zimbabwe of $484 million US. Restructure your government, close those parastatals, and we give you a loan. In Zimbabwe, manufacturing was contributing 16% of the gross domestic product, the GDP, in 1980. And in 1975, manufacturing was contributing 25% to the GDP in Zimbabwe. Well before structural adjustment program. Let's go to Ivory Coast. Ivory Coast in 1960 was the biggest producer of coffee and cocoa. They were the main exporters. Immediately after the structural adjustment programs, the export of coffee and cocoa of Ivory Coast declined. So what is this monster called structural adjustment program that is making African economies collapse? Between 1989 and 1991, Ivory Coast had $132 billion US in debt, which was 132% of the GDP. After structural adjustment program, in 2018, the debt portfolio of Ivory Coast increased by 210%. Ghana is a country blessed with natural resources. Ghana. I went up to Akasombo Dam in Ghana. I even saw the tarmac road which was built by Kwame Nkrumah 50 years ago. It is still standing in Ghana. But the IMF and World Bank stopped it. That's very expensive. That's a white elephant. Now the tarmac road sponsored by the IMF and World Bank through loans have given way, and the road of Kwame Nkrumah is still there. In Uganda, in West Nile, President Amin tried some technology of construction of roads in Koboko. Short distance, 8 kilometers, up to today, 50 years, the roads are still there. But the IMF and the World Bank loans for roads, the roads have given way. In Ghana, Ghana was the major exporter of rice to the world. But when they were given the IMF loans, because those days the government would invest and subsidize farmers, give fertilizers to farmers, and the rice production was very high. But when IMF came and said, Ghana, don't subsidize the farmers, the rice farmers in Kumasi collapsed. The youth started traveling from Kumasi to Accra looking for jobs, youths that were traditionally working in rice farms. Ghana became the biggest importer of rice. Where is Ghana importing rice from? United States of America. And this is the biggest partner of IMF and World Bank that gave loan to Ghana. This IMF has helped Ghana to fail to learn how to produce rice and they import from US. I think the IMF is a poisonous chalice to African governments. Let's look at the total debt portfolio, because I cannot move and rove in all the African countries one by one to explain the ramifications of the structural adjustment programs. But at least we can galvanize and see the general debt portfolio, because they forced African governments to get loans from them to cut down the size of government. that the government should be profitable. Now it caused severe ramifications. Let's look at the debt portfolio. Burkina Faso, before the IMF, had 22 million US dollar loan. After the IMF and World Bank restructuring, Burkina Faso now has a loan of 254 million US dollars. Structural Adjustment Program, IMF, World Bank. Chad had a loan of 17 million US dollars before IMF and World Bank and structural adjustment programs. Now Chad has a loan portfolio of 475 million US dollars after the structural adjustment programs. Ghana, the biggest rice growing country, before the structural adjustment programs and the IMF loans and World Bank, they had a debt portfolio of 32 million US dollars. After the structural adjustment programs, check this figure. Ghana has 1,376 million US dollars loans, courtesy of structural adjustment programs. Senegal had 17 million US dollars loan before the structural adjustment programs. After the structural adjustment program, the Senegalese debt portfolio increased to 435 million US dollars after the structural adjustment program. So what is this animal called structural adjustment program? Let us look at the total debt portfolio of sub-Saharan Africa before the structural adjustment program. In 1980, the total loan portfolio of African governments was 560 billion US dollars. That was the total debt portfolio of the African governments before the structural adjustment programs. After the structural adjustment programs, in 1992, the total debt portfolio of the African governments, 1,622 billion US dollars. African governments are heavily indebted to the Western world government. To me, that is my opinion on the purpose of the structural adjustment programs. We are heavily indebted. You need loans, restructure. You need loans, give us this contract. Debts and debts. If you are cooperating, your debts are forgiven. Some of the debts, even our grandchildren will not pay for it. If you cooperate with them, do this, your debts are forgiven. They even come into your country and force you to give contracts to their companies. And they make the profits and walk away with it to Europe and America in the name of structural adjustment. That is bullying. Where oil is discovered, in Sudan, in Libya, in Iraq, these are countries that can fund their own activities without the IMF and World Bank. If the president is not cooperating, they remove you from power and put another puppet because they don't want these countries independent. That's why you're having problems in the Middle East. Look at what Gaddafi did in Libya. He turned the desert into an oasis. He greened Libya. And see how he departed the sea. Albeit there are limitations. Same Saddam Hussein. So there is a deliberate ploy which is studied in political science classrooms at the great universities of Harvard or Wales, how to control African governments. Actually, as a political scientist, there are even questions now they put in Harvard Institute of Political Science that African governments are not profitable. They should be privatized to multinational companies like Coca-Cola. Discuss. Who told you government is to make profit? If that is the European capitalist model, where the law came into place to protect capital and capital owners, the African model is Ubuntu. The African model is socialism. I am because you are. Africans don't thrive on profit. So the model works for you, it doesn't work for us. We are heavily indebted. So IMF has put profit beyond livelihood. And that is the essence of capitalism. To give back, you pay money. To go to school, you pay money. To graduate, you pay money. To get a job, you pay money. You get a job, you pay taxes. You die, you need money to get a coffin. Alternatively, you need to be cremated. I was in New York at a bar, enjoying my drink. And what do I see in the world? That you want to take a body home, cremation is $3. We burn you and take your body home. That is the essence of capitalism. From womb to grave. Does this model work for Africa? What should be done? When I was still in active politics, I went left. I don't believe that looking for profit and private capital can change the face of this African continent. There are certain units that must be in the hands of the government and not for profit. Education. Our colonial presidents had an educational policy. In my home country in Uganda, the government built great secondary schools. Umbachi College, Komboni College, Sir Samuel Becker, St. Leo's, King College, Budu, and there was a cultural exchange. My late father, James Oto, from Gulu, went and studied in Fort Portal in St. Leo's. They wanted the country to cross-pollinate and fuse. Education was not for profit. The government hospitals were operational in many African countries. The doctor's quarter was for free. Electricity was for free. Water was for free. Because they were working for government. If you qualified for medicine at the universities, you would get a free scholarship from the governments. In Kenya, in Tanzania, in Rwanda, in Burundi. They would even come and say, congratulations, they would look for you in the village. The colonial police would ride to the village and look for you, say, are you Odonga? Yes, congratulations, you've got a scholarship. But these days, because of capitalism, you have to pay money to get scholarship. So our African leaders should start thinking. We are in the extreme of the scales. On this side is extreme capitalism. Education privatized, health privatized, security privatized, religion privatized, everything privatized. And at the end of this scale, education should be in hands of government, transport in hands of government, health in hands of government. And that's what is happening. The public transport in the Western world works. In Africa, it doesn't work. If you read the books of Joseph Stiglitz, it's one of my favorite books, The Discontents of Globalization. Joseph Stiglitz was one of the bosses at the IMF. And he said, in the preface of his book, he said he wished to live long to observe two countries in Africa, Uganda and Ethiopia. Because we have taken the extreme form of capitalism and privatization. That even the Americans that are the architects and founders of capitalism, they are studying Uganda and Ethiopian government, the extremes in which capitalism can go. They test and see the ramifications. So our president, anyone seeking elective office, we must start thinking of going left. We have seen the ramifications of capitalism. The debt portfolio of our countries are increasing every day. You keep borrowing, you keep borrowing. And what happens in the next 10 years, in the next 20 years, in the next 50 years? They will say, pay our loan. If you don't pay our loan, they remove the country. There is a country, I don't want to mention the name, they have already lost their port to China. They've taken it for 50 years to recover their loans. So this would be the worst form of colonization and slavery in Africa. At least those days, slave trade, they would take people to Europe. Now they are coming here to take your land. So the thinking has to begin. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and greetings. Thank you.